The Brynthos Rift stretched like a scar across the dark, a twisted band of ion storms and fractured rock where trade lanes kinked away from sanity. Stars blinked through veils of electromagnetic haze. Miners and smugglers loved the region. Diplomats and admirals did not. It was difficult to police, easy to disappear into, and rich enough in exotic minerals that no one could afford to ignore it. Through that turbulence slid a vessel painted in white and gold, her flanks marked by blue crescents and universal medical sigils. The Harbor of Ithaca did not look like a ship that belonged in a place like this. Her hull lacked obvious weapon ports. Her transponders broadcast nothing but med-signal beacons and cargo declarations, surgical nanites, antibiotics, prosthetics, food, clean water. Her mission fell under Project Nightingale, the Solaris Union's attempt to carve a humanitarian corridor through chaos. On the bridge, Captain Rian Maddox stood at the forward viewport and watched a silent lightning storm ripple across a distant gas giant's rings. The faint hum of the deck under his boots matched the ache in his reconstructed spine. He shifted his stance, easing pressure off his right leg, then deliberately stilled. Ritual. A reminder that his body was not what it had been, but still serviceable. He knew the Rift's reputation. Every captain did. He also knew his orders: maintain strict neutrality, follow Nightingale protocols, trust in the treaties that supposedly shielded medical craft. Trust, in other words, in colored paint on a hull to ward off predators. He did not. Traffic density? He asked, eyes never leaving the view. Ensign Juno Cato, seated at the sensor console, flicked through display layers. Her fingers moved automatically, but her jaw worked with habitual tension. 3 civilian transits within 2 light minutes, she said. All on approved lanes. No military contacts, no active weapon signatures. Long range shows some ion scatter at 6 o'clock, but that could be just the Rift being the Rift. Could be, Rian murmured. His mind, unlike hers, was not focused on the last few minutes, but on the last few years. Convoys, ambushes, escorts who arrived just late enough to write letters instead of after-action reports. He remembered the sick lurch in his stomach when an armored cruiser had exploded under his command, the way he had stared at casualty projections that did not feel like numbers, but like weights stacked on his chest. Behind him, the bridge hatch opened with a soft hiss. Dr. Lala Nazari stepped through, tugging off a pair of surgical gloves and dropping them into a recycler. Her dark hair was pulled tight in a utilitarian knot. Faint arcs beneath her eyes betrayed too many shifts in a row. If you insist on cruising through a combat zone, you could at least have more chairs installed, she said. The human spine was not designed for hours of standing watch. Ask any orthopedic surgeon. Rian half turned. You've told me many times the human spine wasn't designed for any of the things we do with it. True. She walked to the viewport, looking past him at the same storm. Her reflection nudged up next to his in the glass, tall, straight-backed, expression composed. How's our illustrious bridge crew? Any reason I should call ahead and prep the triage wards? Besides the chronic condition known as bureaucratic delusion. We're well within Nightingale corridor parameters, Juno put in, over her shoulder. She sounded as if she were reciting from a manual and apologizing for it. Escorted in the previous sector, this stretch has been quiet for weeks. Has been, Lala repeated softly, a surgeon's least favorite tense. Rian glanced at her. Councillor Ono would like you to pretend the tension doesn't exist. Councillor Ono can scrub the OR if he wants to feel useful, she said. We just lost 3 burn victims from Aristea Outpost because this region is quiet enough that someone underfunded the emergency transfer budget. He knew her anger. He shared it, but he also knew the calculus at the top. Humanitarian missions made good broadcasts. A white ship in a dark place reassured citizens that their civilization was still humane. Politicians like Councillor Nabil Ono needed that image. Aristea's latest casualties are in stable condition, he asked. Stable is a generous word, Lala replied. They're alive, for now. We've got 3 major surgeries scheduled before 6 p.m., and that's just the easy list. She exhaled, then nodded toward the viewport. We also have Elder Vareshi composing sonnets about human resilience in Medical Bay 2, or whatever the Sythari equivalent of a sonnet is. The delegation's very pleased. Rian thought of the Sythari observer, robed and mild-eyed, drifting through wards and noting everything. Their people lived at a slower pace, physically and politically. It amused him that they had volunteered to oversee Project Nightingale's early phases. It worried him that they might eventually judge it. "The Elder isn't wrong," he said, though he was thinking of something more specific than Lala's overworked teams. "We are resilient." "We're stubborn," she countered. "Resilient is the polite word stubborn people use when they want to meddle." Juno coughed politely. "We also have Ambassador Ramani on the line, Captain. Again, she would like to know if her arrival time at Port Salucre is still on schedule. Her negotiators are already spinning this visit as a sign of the corridor's stability." "Of course they are," Rian said. "Patch her through to my ready room. Doctor, don't let my paranoia delay any life-saving procedures." He turned to leave, feeling Lala's eyes on his back. She worried about him when he used words like paranoia. He worried about her when she joked too easily about death. Neither of them could do their jobs without those flaws. Down a few decks and aft, the Harbor of Ithaca's identity felt entirely different. There, sterility reigned, white walls, soft lighting, murmuring medbots gliding past. The smell of antiseptic struggled against a ghost of burned flesh and antiseptic gel. In the rehab ward, Sergeant Mirek Zorik gritted his teeth and pushed. The exoskeleton frame around his right leg whined as servos assisted the motion. Sweat traced lines through the stubble on his cheeks. His hair had started to silver in uneven streaks long before his last deployment. Now it stuck up in messy spikes. "Again," Nurse Pilares Hugo said, arms folded. She was slight, with close-cropped hair and the posture of someone who had spent her life lifting people twice her size. "Unless your grand plan is to let that muscle melt off and spend the rest of your days yelling at screens." "I was planning on a dignified retirement yelling at politicians," Mirek replied. "Different sort of exercise." "Then this is practice," she said. "Up." He pushed. The exoskeleton helped, but the weight was still his. Scar tissue tugged across his lower back. He had once led a boarding squad through a zero-G breach under live fire, vaulting from hull to hull like a predator. Now getting to his feet felt like climbing a mountain. He did it anyway. "Good," Pilar said, satisfaction slipping into her tone. "I've seen rookies with fewer excuses do worse." Around them, other veterans struggled through their own exercises. One worked with an arm prosthesis, learning the delicate pinch needed to pick up a cup without crushing it. Another wobbled with a balance harness, inner ear reconstruction not yet tuned. Voices overlapped, grunts, curses, laughter. These people had gone to the frontier, fought, bled, and now found themselves on a ship named after a myth of homecoming. Mirek looked past the rehab equipment, past the improvised notice board full of scribbled jokes and rough sketches, to the ward's main display. A looping feed from the external cameras showed the Rift's storms streaking by. "Think they'll really keep this corridor safe?" a younger veteran on the next machine asked between gasps. Corpsman KG Tan, still in his 20s, with the haunted eyes of someone who had seen too many young faces go slack. "We're betting a lot on colored stripes and a catchy project name." "They'll keep it safe until somebody decides they can't afford to," Mirek said. "Or until someone gets bored enough to test the theory." "You're not exactly calming my nerves," KG muttered. "Good. Nervous people pay attention." Mirek flexed his fingers on the exoskeleton's handle. In his mind, he laid out the Harbor of Ithaca's decks, remembering the schematic he had seen when they brought him aboard. Medical bays here, engineering there, bridge forward. Too few guards for a ship this size by design. Security theater, he had called it, under his breath. Nightingale wouldn't allow much more. He had been a Marine too long to ignore vulnerabilities, even when his orders were technically to rest and recover. At 3 p.m. ship's time, in a quiet corner of Medical Bay 2, Elder Vareshi watched humans cry. He stood at the edge of a common area, his tall, slender frame wrapped in layered robes that shifted color slowly, reflecting his contemplative mood. His eyes, larger and more reflective than human ones, tracked a small cluster of patients surrounding a projection of a wooded hillside on some far-off Earth analog. A counselor spoke softly, encouraging each person to describe the last place they had felt truly safe. Vareshi listened, recording, comparing. The Sythari did not send their wounded far from their homeworlds. Their culture nested care in the center of their civilization, not at its edges. He had found it strange that humans stationed their brightest surgeons and most advanced hospital ships on bloody frontiers. Stranger still that they then filled those ships with those who had already given so much. A woman with burn-scarred hands described a cabin buried in snow, full of the smell of wood smoke. A man whose lungs had only recently stopped seizing under artificial support described an orbital station's rotating gardens, where he had slept under a glass dome as deployment loomed. They all talked about places they had left behind to go to war. They spoke of safety as something they had willingly abandoned. To Vareshi, that was the puzzle at the heart of humanity. The way they walked away from comfort toward danger, convinced it was necessary. A chime sounded softly in his ear implant. A message from his counterpart aboard the Sythari cruiser Lumestral, trailing a safer lane behind. Commander Alessa Rin offered an update on their course and a philosophical question about Nightingale's long-term prospects. Vareshi composed his reply in measured tones, framing his observations so far in language his people would accept. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but also capable of structured compassion. He did not yet write what had begun to trouble him most, that so many of the harbor's patients still thought like soldiers. As the ship crossed an invisible threshold in the rift, a near-field sensor blipped on Juno Cato's console. It was the kind of blip that could be dismissed, a flicker at the edge of range, a spike that might have been a statistical outlier in the noise. She frowned and ran a filter. The signal dissipated, merging into background. She thought of the last performance review she had signed off on. Her superior had written that she had a habit of chasing ghosts in data, that she needed to learn to trust established thresholds. She thought of Captain Maddox's quiet expression of support afterward. Someone needs to see the ghosts before they become wreckage. Her fingers danced. She widened the scan window, layered on a historical comparison. The new pattern did not match civilian traffic they had logged before. It felt deliberate, pulsed. "Captain?" she said. Rian stepped closer. His gaze flicked over the display in a heartbeat, then returned to the starfield beyond, though the real threat was invisible. "Source? Unknown. Could be a long-range sensor ping, modulated. It's not broadcasting an ID. Bearing? Approximately 2 o'clock high. Could be behind that ion curtain." "Could be nothing," said a junior navigator softly. "Could be," Rian agreed. He weighed options in a quiet instant. Nightingale regulations said he should log the contact, maintain course, and trust corridors and escorts. Old instincts said that if someone was painting them, they should move. He compromised, as he had learned to do. "Adjust course by 3 degrees port," he ordered. "Not enough to signal panic, enough to be courteous to anyone else sharing space with us out there." The course correction appeared on Juno's display as a gentle curve. She swallowed her tension and settled back. She wanted to tell him outright that her gut screamed, but she had learned not to use that word in duty reports. She marked the anomalous contact with a discreet internal tag. Down in his office, Councillor Nabil Ono practiced his smile. He stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the fold of his suit collar, narrowing and widening his eyes. His features were soft, his hairline beginning to recede, his paunch slight but undeniable. That was all right. He had long ago learned that a certain softness made people trust him. You could not send a man who looked like a war statue to sell peace. On the desk behind him, a hollow feed flickered with images from the Harbor of Ithaca, medics wheeling patients, doctors leaning over beds, the rift a luminous blur beyond windows. The feed's caption scrolled, "Project Nightingale, Hope in the Dark." Perfect. He needed this image. The Solaris Union was tired. Trade imbalances, skirmishes with raiders, political infighting over military budgets. A successful humanitarian corridor would do more than save lives. It would restore a sense of moral purpose. He did not like that Captain Maddox had a reputation as a combat officer. The man on screen had hard lines bracketing his mouth and a gaze that never fully relaxed. Such men were necessary in certain positions, but on a medical ship they made broadcasters nervous. Still, Nabil assured himself, Operation Hearthguard required such people. He had signed off on that contingency with a heavy pen, dizzy at the risk. Officially, the Harbor of Ithaca carried veterans because research showed that camaraderie and purpose improved outcomes for wounded soldiers. Unofficially, buried deep in classified files, Hearthguard assigned clusters of these veterans to missions where a hospital ship might be targeted. People who had seen too much war were now to be living bulwarks on peaceful vessels. He told himself it was for their good, too, a way to channel their instincts, give them something worth protecting. He didn't foresee, in that moment, how quickly those instincts would be tested. The trap closed with deceptive grace. One instant, the Harbor of Ithaca drifted through a corridor strewn with charged particles and flickers of light. The next, the local starscape shimmered as if someone had drawn a curtain. Juno's consoles screamed with warnings. Unidentified mass signatures bloomed around them, rising like jaws. "Multiple contacts," she snapped, dropping in from microfold at minimal distance. They used the ion curtain to mask their approach. Ryan's posture tightened. "Evasive!" He didn't finish. Gravity lurched as tractor beams slammed into the harbor's hull. The view outside tilted. The white ship's nose yawed, dragged toward a darker knot of shadow where no ship had been a second before. Alarms rolled through corridors in overlapping waves. In Medical Bay 2, Vareshi stumbled, robes rippling as he braced himself on a railing. In rehab, Mirek grabbed a support bar and swore eloquently while other veterans clung to rails or toppled from machines. In surgery, Dr. Lala Nazari's hands remained steady above an open chest while instruments drifted for a heartbeat before backup stabilizers engaged. "What is that?" KG gasped, watching through the ward's small viewport as black shapes crawled into focus against the rift's electric haze. Draav ships, pack hunters. Their silhouettes were all angles and protrusions, like shards of rock bristling with antennae and weapon mounts. The Trelgorath Combine had branded them with neon glyphs along their hulls, emblems of clans that prided themselves on taking what others could not keep. They had been stalking the corridor for days, following sensor ghosts of the hospital ship, waiting for the escort frigate Rampart's Edge to move just far enough away under Nightingale protocols. The moment it did, they leapt. Rian stared down the iron lobes of the lead raider's bow as if he could see Korvek Thurn through the hull. He could not, but he understood the mind behind the maneuver. Hit them fast, hit them hard, jam their pleas for help. "Signal Rampart's Edge," he said. "All channels." "They're under fire," Juno reported, voice tightening. "Hull impacts, shield collapse. They're trying to come about, but they were patrolling 30,000 kilometers off. At this distance..." A new bloom on her screen cut her off. The escort's signature flared white-hot, then guttered, falling into emergency mode. Some part of the smaller ship had gone dark, dead, or deliberately powered down. Nightingale rules forbade the harbor from altering course drastically or trying to run. They were to remain on designated lanes, trust negotiators and treaty markings. To flee would be to escalate. Rian Maddox closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. Then he opened them. "Broadcast med override on all hailing frequencies," he ordered. "Identify us as a protected vessel, power down non-essential systems, comply with towing commands, and Ensign, give me a quiet channel on Line B." Juno's fingers flew. "Line B, aye." He spoke not for Draav ears, but for his own ship. "All hands, this is the captain. We are under interdiction. We will comply with Nightingale protocols. There will be no armed resistance. Repeat, there will be no armed resistance. Medical staff are to prioritize patient safety and follow Draav directives where they do not endanger critical care. That is an order." The words tasted like acid. They sounded like surrender. Every veteran on board, every medic who had worked under fire, heard something else. They heard a man who knew they were not truly defenseless, sweeping a chessboard clear of obvious moves so that the subtle ones could begin. In the rehab ward, Mirek let out a breath. "You heard the man," he said loudly. "No resistance. Everyone behave. Keep your heads down." Pilar shot him a look. He met her gaze, held it for a fraction of a second too long, then looked away. Message received. On the Draav flagship, Korvek Thurn watched the hospital ship's exterior lights dim. His tongue flicked over the sharp plates along his teeth, amusement flickering through him. "So predictable," he rasped to his lieutenant. "They think if they lower their heads, the predator will grow bored and leave." Rusk Tal stood at his side, arms folded, eyes narrowed. "It is a medical vessel," Rusk said. "There could be contagions, or traps. The Union is not stupid." Korvek let out a rough laugh. "They are very good at pretending to be stupid when it suits them. Look at that hull. Look at those little blue sigils." He gestured toward the projection. "They think paint is armor. They think treaties are teeth." "In the last raid, the human freighter had concealed guns," Rusk reminded him. "And we killed them first," Korvek replied. "This one is different. Nightingale protocols forbid it from carrying weapons. Besides, even if they have a sting, they are still flies. We are the web." His hand shot out, stabbing at the command interface. Boarding wings Alpha through Delta and attach. Target hangar bays and main access ports. I want the bridge secured, the medical decks under guard, and any high-ranking officers collared. We will strip their supplies, ransom their surgeons, and sell the rest. And make sure our colors are visible when we are done. Let the corridor's little children see what happens when they come into our dark." His pack howled in assent, a harsh chorus in the flag deck. Rusktal kept his reservations to himself. He had raided human ships before. They broke in many ways, but when cornered, they became something else. And this ship, for all its soft markings, carried an escort until very recently. That meant it was important. The boarding began with the screech of metal and the hiss of compressed gas. 3 docking tubes latched onto the harbor's primary hangar bays, their segmented bodies flexing, forming sealed tunnels. Draav assault teams flooded through, weapons raised. Their armor was modeled, patchwork, each piece a trophy from a different raid. Their helmets were faceted, multiple lenses giving them insect-like faces. In the hangar, Rian stood in front of a line of kneeling crew and patients. Armed security had already surrendered their pistols. Medbots hovered above stretchers, their manipulators folded submissively. The hatch at the end of the tube irised open. Korvek Thurn stepped through first. Taller and heavier than most of his warriors, his crest of rough, horn-like ridges bearing metal studs that marked victories. He looked like a walking cave bristling with knives. He scanned the hangar, taking in the cowering shapes, the soft beeps of machines, the docile line of humans. His gaze landed on Rian, who alone remained standing. "You are in command?" Korvek asked. His voice carried, untranslated, a guttural scrape. The translator patch stuck behind Ryan's ear whispered the words into his language a fraction of a second later. "I am Captain Rian Maddox, Commandant and Officer of the Harbor of Ithaca," Rian said, calm. Korvek walked up to him, close enough that Rian smelled the sharp tang of alien sweat and stale ship air. He reached out and flicked a finger against the captain's chest, tapping the aurora blue crest of the Solaris Union on his uniform. "Paint," he said. "Paint and paper." "Nightingale Accords recognize medical ships as neutral," Rian replied. "Our cargo is humanitarian aid. Our passengers are wounded. You gain nothing by—" Korvek struck him. The backhand sent Rian sprawling to one knee. Pain flared up his spine, electric. He grunted, tasted blood, and stayed where he was. "I gain a ship," Korvek said. "I gain supplies. I gain hostages. I gain an example." He turned to his warriors, raising his voice. "Search every deck, lock down every ward, seal off engineering, comms, and armories. Any resistance is to be punished publicly. Hurt them enough, and they will not try again." Draav teams fanned out, boots pounding on deck plates, shouts and the clatter of equipment echoing along corridors that had, an hour ago, known only the squeak of carts and the murmur of voices. On the Sythari cruiser Lumestral, alarms carried different timbres. The bridge's light dimmed as new data scrolled across central hollows. Commander Alessa Rin stood with hands clasped behind her back, feeling the ship's subtle shift in power distribution as if it were a muscle clenching. "Confirm that," she said, eyes on the flickering rune that represented the Harbor of Ithaca. "We are receiving distress or an echo?" "Unclear," her communications officer replied. "There was a standard status update at 2 p.m., then static, then this." He played a burst. It sounded like a glitch, a stutter in the noise, but embedded in it, in the modulation of the carrier wave, was a pattern. Alessa's sensory palette was not as fine-tuned as Vareshi's. Still, she had learned enough of human coding habits to recognize an intentional signature. The pattern marked the signal as coming from an internal comm station on the harbor, not an automated beacon. It repeated, with slight variations, around the edges of the static. She tapped a command. The ship's computer highlighted the repeating substructure and translated it into something almost like a message. Under attack, hostiles on board, Nightingale protocols compromised. Her jaw tightened. "Distance?" 3 light minutes, navigation replied. "The Brynthos Rift's interference complicates precise calculation, but—" "And our orders?" her first officer prompted. "We are to monitor, not intervene. Nightingale has its own internal enforcement. If we interfere directly with Draav operations in the Rift, the Trelgorath Combine could declare this a violation of their territorial claims." Alessa thought of those claims. Smugglers and raiders had carved the rift into nebulous domains where they asserted rights like any petty lord. Interfering with them carried risks. War, perhaps, over a humanitarian experiment. She also thought of Elder Vareshi, standing on that white ship, watching. "Open a line to the Elder," she said, "and in the meantime, adjust course. Bring us closer under ion cover. Minimal emissions." "You intend to disobey?" her first officer asked quietly, stunned. "I intend," she replied, "to interpret our orders in a way that does not involve watching a hospital burn." Inside the Harbor of Ithaca, drafting rooms and sterile wards became occupied territory. Draav guards posted themselves at every intersection. They herded civilians into central chambers, confiscated datapads, sealed bulkheads. Patients in gowns shuffled under the watchful eyes of armored raiders. A few tried to protest. Most kept silent, shocked into compliance. In the rehab ward, a trio of Draav came in loud. One knocked a stack of therapy bands to the floor with casual disdain. Another strode up to Mirek, who was halfway between machines, and shoved a weapon muzzle under his chin. "Down!" the raider growled. The translator on Mirek's wrist chewed through the words and rendered them with cruel clarity. Mirek lifted his hand slowly. "You first," he said mildly. Pilar hissed under her breath. "Mirek." He let his gaze roam the room while he sank to his knees. Drapes, partitions, equipment carts, lines of sight, numbers. He counted Draav. 3 here, 2 visible in the corridor. He counted humans, a dozen veterans, various degrees of mobility. Half could still break a neck with one hand. The Draav laughed. "You have fire," the one above him said. "Good. Good for the markets. Buyers like that at first." The implication sank into the ward's air like poison. Some of the younger patients went pale. KG's hand flexed, instinctively reaching for a sidearm that was not there. Pilar stepped between the Draav and the others, lifting her med slate. "They need medications every hour," she said. "If you interfere with—" A rifle butt swung toward her. Mirek moved without thinking. His bad leg screamed as he launched himself sideways, catching the weapon with his shoulder. Pain rippled through his torso. The blow meant for Pilar glanced off, barely staggering her. The Draav snarled. The muzzle swung again. This time, Mirek did not block. He stayed still, absorbing the strike against his cheek. His vision flashed white, but behind the flare he held on to clarity. He let them see him do it, let them see him choose not to fight. "Enough!" Pilar barked, before the raider could swing a third time. Her voice cracked like a whip. "You'll want them alive and functional if you plan to sell them. Brain damage lowers the price. Ask any slaver." The Draav paused. Greed warred with temper. Ultimately, greed won. The enforcer lowered his rifle a fraction. "Sit," he spat. "Obey, or you travel as frozen cargo." They withdrew to the ward's entryway, talking in their own tongue. Mirek sat on the cold floor and dabbed at his split lip with a thumb. Pilar knelt, her hands gentle as she examined the bruise blossoming on his jaw. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Was that worth nearly taking your head off?" "Yes," Mirek murmured. Behind her, his eyes flicked to the ceiling, where a maintenance hatch sat high above the therapy racks. "They think we're broken. Let them keep thinking it." KG leaned in, keeping his face blank. "What are you planning?" "Not yet," Mirek said. "First, we see how good they are at counting." On the medical decks, Dr. Lala Nazari established a new reality with the same unflinching calm she used in an operating theater. Draav guards loomed in doorways, weapons at low ready, watching her staff move among patients. She did not plead with them. She did not beg. She informed. "These 12 cannot be moved without critical support," she told one squad leader, indicating a cluster of post-operative patients. "These 8 require constant monitoring. These 4 are in quarantine. You will not open their doors. If you do, your people get sick first." The raider hesitated. Disease terrified raiding cultures that lived in close quarters. Ignorant of many pathogens, they nevertheless respected the concept. "How sick?" he demanded. Lala let her gaze linger on his unfiltered breathing vents. "Very," she said calmly. "Fast." He stepped back. She arranged her wards not only by medical need but by strategic potential. Patients who were physically capable but officially unstable were grouped in areas with access to service conduits. She marked their charts with subtle symbols that meant nothing to the Draav but everything to her staff. Hidden in the patterns were instructions: stay alert, wait for signals, trust the veterans. In a supply alcove, Hugo Van Dalen flipped through manifests while a Draav quartermaster loomed over his shoulder, impatient. Where do you keep your surgical nanites? The alien asked. The translator assigned them a gravelly voice. Hugo pretended to fumble. Section C, he said, pointing toward a row of lockers far from the actual stores. We have to keep them separate from other sterilized tools. Regulation. The Draav stalked off, taking 2 others. Hugo watched them go and then quietly marked that corridor on his pad. It led past a junction where doors could be sealed manually. He made a note to check the emergency overrides. Operation Hearthguard had not given him a script. It had given him permission. Permission to think of the hospital as something that needed defending. He had handled logistics for field units before. He knew how to starve an enemy of what they needed most. On a hospital ship, what they needed most was information and freedom of movement. He could deny them both. In Medical Bay 2, Elder Vareshi spoke with Rian Maddox, while a Draav guard stood by the door, ostensibly to ensure they did not conspire. The guard's attention wandered. He understood little of their soft voices and less of their cultural references. You anticipated something like this, Vareshi said quietly. It was not truly a question. His senses had noted the subtle ways crew and veterans deferred to certain unspoken cues, the way security systems had redundancies that did not fit a purely medical profile. I anticipated that sooner or later someone would test the corridor, Rian replied. He winced as Lala's medgel patch itched along his bruised cheekbone. I did not think they would be so organized this early. Vareshi shifted, robes whispering. Project Nightingale was presented to us as a pure venture. A promise to step beyond the old rules of conflict. No weapons, no reinforcements, no covert measures. His gaze was steady. Yet you have something else aboard, something your counselor kept out of official reports. Operation Hearthguard, Rian said. His shoulders twitched in a shrug that his spine complained about. I'm not surprised he didn't tell you. It makes the project look less innocent. Is it less? Vareshi asked. Rian considered. It makes it less naive, he said. We did not secretly mount cannons under the hull, Elder. We did something more controversial. We invited people who already knew how to fight to ride along on a ship that was supposed to need no defense. Vareshi had walked among those people. He had seen the way they scanned exits automatically, the way they sat with their backs to walls, the way they reacted to sudden noises. He had thought they were broken by war. Now he reconsidered. You used them, he said. We offered them care and purpose, Rian replied. You may decide that is the same thing. Vareshi tilted his head. And now? Now, Rian said, looking past him toward a corridor where a Draav patrol tromped by, we see if Hearthguard was wisdom or hubris. The Draav as a group were brave by their own standards. They hunted in packs, rushed their enemies with reckless fury, but they were not creative in the way humans were. Their boarding doctrine assumed a certain pattern of resistance, initial panic, scattered attempts at heroics, and then despair. On the Harbor of Ithaca, panic did appear. Some civilians wept openly. Some trembled so badly they could not walk without assistance. Here and there, someone tried to lunge for a weapon and was beaten down. The Draav responded by making examples, striking people, firing into ceilings, threatening to vent compartments. But beneath the obvious chaos, something quieter took root. In each ward, in each corridor, veterans found each other with their eyes. They recognized the set of shoulders, the way hands flexed as if remembering rifle grips. They began to signal, a nod here, a shared curse there, the old subtle language of bodies. Mirek became an axle around which one cluster turned. In whispered conversations during med rounds, he sketched plans. They outnumber us, KG protested, keeping his lips barely moving. They've got guns, We've got a ship they don't understand, Mirek replied. We've got angles and restrictions they don't see. We've got doctors with scalpels and exoframes. Most important, we've got time. They think this is done. That makes them lazy. Pilar's face was tight with frustration. If we start something and they retaliate by spacing the chemo ward, what then? Then we choose targets that don't tip into all-out war until we have to, Mirek said. Right now, they want us alive. They want the surgeons. They want the supplies. That's leverage we can use. We take small bites, test their responses. When we move big, it'll be because we have no choice. She hated that she saw the sense in his words. She had seen what uncontrolled resistance could do, panicked riots that caused more casualties than the initial attack. This was surgery. The first cut came in the form of a false emergency. A veteran down the corridor from the rehab ward began to scream at 3 a.m., clutching his chest, gasping. His bed monitor lit up in warning colors, cardiac irregularity, oxygen saturation dropping. It was not entirely an act. His anxiety and the stress of captivity were real. But the timing had been nudged with sedatives withdrawn an hour earlier by a nurse who looked the other way. Draav guards converged, drawn by noise and flashing lights. 2 left their post at the rehab ward entrance to investigate. The third, annoyed, glanced after them. "Stay," he snapped at the humans. "No moving." "Yes, yes," Mirek said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "We're not going anywhere." The moment the guard's head turned toward the door, the veteran working on the parallel bars let his weight sag as if his knee had buckled. The exoskeleton caught him, servos whining. He flailed, knocking over a tray. Instruments clattered. The guard spun back, instinctively stepping forward to assert control. Pilar moved. She had been carefully placing therapy bands on a rack. Now she flung one, a loop of high-tension polymer at the guard's weapon arm. It snapped around the barrel in his wrist. She yanked, hard, pulling the muzzle offline. The guard snarled and tugged back. The exo-assisted veteran behind him, having regained his balance, stepped in. His enhanced leg pistoned, slamming into the back of the guard's knee with inhuman force. Joint ligaments popped like overstressed cables. The Draav collapsed, roaring. Mirek surged up despite his leg. His hands found the edges of the guard's helmet, twisting. He didn't snap the neck. He slammed the helmet sideways into the metal frame of the therapy bars, dazing the alien. KG was already there, prying the weapon free, fingers moving with old familiarity despite its alien design. "Down," Mirek hissed. "Drag him." They pulled the unconscious Draav behind a bank of machines, out of casual sight. Mirek's muscles shuddered, his breath coming fast. Pain wrapped his leg in molten wire. He bit it back. KG's eyes were wide. "That was quiet," Pilar said. "We've bought maybe 2 minutes before they realize the guard isn't answering." She glanced toward the corridor. The other 2 Draav were still visible in the distance, jammed in a crowded doorway, shouting at medics. If someone called for a status check, they might not notice an absent reply immediately. "What now?" she whispered. Mirek looked at the weapon in KG's hands, then at the rehab ward's layout. Exoframes, panels, a maintenance hatch high on the wall. "Now we get this toy somewhere useful," he said, "and we start moving people through the walls instead of the halls." In a different part of the ship, Hugo Van Dalen trailed a Draav quartermaster into a supply corridor. He had already steered them toward a set of lockers that contained mostly mundane items: bandages, nutrient packs, antiseptic. The raiders complained loudly about the lack of more exotic goods. "This is not worth our time," one grumbled. "We should take the flagship's engines and scrap the rest." Hugo logged the remark. If they meant to destroy the ship once they stripped it, their timetable shortened. He could not rely on a long, slow resistance. He needed to accelerate. As they reached the 3rd locker, a temperature alert blinked on Hugo's wrist. He frowned theatrically and tapped it, muttering about faulty climate control. "What is that?" the Draav demanded. "Life support acting up," Hugo lied. "If the ambient temperature drops in quarantine, some of your people could catch things they're not vaccinated for." He did not mention that Quarantine Section 4 was currently empty, having been quietly used as a staging area for veterans earlier in the day. The quartermaster snarled and gestured to one of his subordinates. "Go, check it. Make sure they are not hiding anything." The subordinate cursed and stomped off. Hugo watched him leave, then keyed open the nearest emergency panel when the Draav turned away. Inside, a manual override lever gleamed red in the dim light, old tech rarely used but required by regulation. He noted its position, then sealed the panel, face blank. In his mind, pathways threaded through the harbor, corridors that could be cut, airflows that could be redirected, bulkheads that could be sealed, logistics in reverse. Instead of enabling movement, he would constrict it. He wondered, fleetingly, what Councillor Ono would think if he could see him now, turning a hospital ship's infrastructural arteries into strangling hands. Then he thought of the burn victims in post-op, and the wondering ceased. On the Sythari cruiser, Vareshi's report to Commander Alessarin was concise, but layered with cultural weight. "The humans are doing what humans do," he said via secure channel. "They submitted outwardly, but internally, they are already at work. They're veterans in particular. They are treating this not as a violation of peace, but as a shift in terrain." Alessa listened, watching the ghostly projection of the harbor's trajectory. Under Draav tractor influence, it was veering off the designated lane into a denser knot of the rift's chaos. "Can they hold?" she asked. "They will try," Vareshi said. "Even if they cannot, their attempt will be instructive." She didn't like that answer, but she understood it. Sythari philosophy prized patient observation over intervention. But Alessa had spent more time with humans than most of her peers. Their ways had rubbed off on her. She could not simply watch. "We cannot match the Trelgorith Combine's numbers in this region," she said, "but we can choose where we appear. If we arrive openly, they may kill everyone on board to cover their crime. If we arrive silently, we give the humans a second front," Vareshi finished, "something to coordinate with." His robe's colors shifted toward a warmer hue. "Commander, if you wish a Sythari blessing on tactical aggression, you may consider this it." Alessa smiled without humor. "Then we will be aggressive." Quietly. She turned to her helm officer. "Plot an intercept through the ion storm barrier. Minimal emissions, full shielding. If the storm strips our paint, we will repaint. If it strips our hull, we will call it destiny." The helm officer's frills tightened in dread and respect. "Yes, Commander." Time stretched aboard the harbor, hours blurred, punctuated by shifts in guard rotations and the thump of boots outside doors. Fear settled into a heavy background hum. Rian walked his ship under escort, flanked by Draav warriors. Korvek had decided it amused him to parade the captain through his own corridors. They passed huddled clusters of patients, knots of staff. Rian kept his expression neutral, but his eyes catalogued everything. Guard positions, frequency of patrols, which bulkheads had scorch marks now, indicating forced entries. In return, those who saw him took strength. The fact that he was still moving, not locked in some cell, meant the game was not over. They reached the surgical deck. Korvek gestured toward the open theater where Lala stood over a Draav patient. The alien's chest was open, viscera glistening under bright lights. Monitors chirped, her hands moved in precise arcs. "One of yours?" Korvek asked, voice filled with amusement that had no warmth. "One of yours," Rian said. He knew from the brief that a Draav had taken a shard of metal in the abdomen during the boarding, too far from their own facilities to risk extraction without proper tools. They had dragged him, bleeding, to Lala's door. Korvek snorted. "You fix him for me, then I decide if you live." "That will be a nice change of pace," Lala called without looking up. Her tone was dry, but inside she was taut as wire. Each motion had to be perfect, not only to save a life but to buy leverage. Korvek stepped into the observation bay above the theater, pulling Rian along. From there, he could watch the surgery like a spectator sport. Rian watched too, but his gaze kept drifting to doors, vents, the positions of Draav in the room. On the lower level, behind a line of support columns, two veterans in smocks moved as if fetching a supply cart. One was a former infiltration specialist whose medical chart listed only respiratory injury, a partial truth. The other had once rigged demolitions on asteroid facilities. Their eyes met Lala's for a moment. She did not nod, did not signal, but she had already agreed earlier to their plan. The surgical deck's layout and equipment made it an ideal testing ground. As Lala worked, a faint hiss began in the vents. It did not smell of anesthetic. It smelled of nothing at all. But its composition had been adjusted through environmental control, with Hugo's quiet assistance, to lower Draav aggression response by inducing a light-headed fog. It would not be enough to incapacitate them fully, not without endangering the patients, but it might make them slow. The first indication came from a guard shifting at the observation bay door. He rubbed at his helmet seals as if the world had gone a fraction too soft. His gaze drifted. In the theater, Lala's assistant accidentally bumped a tray, sending an instrument clattering to the floor. A guard near the door turned his head. At the same time, one of the veterans behind the columns tugged loose a panel, exposing a conduit. A directed blast of coolant fog billowed, thicker and denser than the environmental gas, obscuring vision for a few seconds. Lala did not flinch. Her hands continued their dance above the exposed organs, guided in part by muscle memory, in part by the soft prompts of a console. The Draav on the table was deeply under. His life depended entirely on her focus. Shadows moved in the fog. The veterans struck from close range, using non-lethal methods where they could. Chokeholds, improvised restraints, stunning blows to helmet seams. Draav went down, disarmed. Above, Korvek frowned. What is that? He demanded, leaning forward. Coolant leak, Rian said. These theaters run hot. He knew Korvek did not fully buy it. The raider leader's nostrils flared. His hand twitched toward his sidearm. Then Lala spoke, her voice steady. Clamp, she said to her assistant. Now. On the monitor, a red line that had been dropping stabilized. The Draav patient's blood pressure returned to near normal. Korvek's attention snapped back to the table. His life might not have meant much to Korvek personally, but losing him under the surgeon's hands would bruise his authority. He lives? Korvek demanded. If no more idiots distract me, Lala said. Do you want your man alive, or do you want to storm around proving you can shout louder than my monitors? The insult was calculated. Korvek stared at her, gauging whether to be angry. Around him, his guards swayed, subtly affected by the gas, their focus narrowed. Korvek chose his pride in this moment to be magnanimous. He leaned back. Do your work, human, he said. Fix him. Then I will decide how many of yours you get to keep. You'll want him too, Rian said quietly. For your own people. Korvek scoffed. A surgical technician? A healer? I have plenty. A witness, Rian replied. Someone who can tell you whether we kept our oath when we could have let him bleed out. Korvek said nothing, but some part of him understood the value of that. The surgical deck stand did not end with a dramatic firefight. It ended with Draav guards slumped groggily against walls, wrists bound behind their backs with surgical tubing, and Lala stepping away from a successfully closed incision. We'll need 4 hours before I can promise he's out of danger, she said. Korvek paced among his subdued warriors, rage building. He noted the lack of bodies. His people were alive, merely bound. You chose not to kill them, he said to Rian. We're a hospital, Rian replied. We save lives, even when they don't deserve it. His inner calculation ticked away. This act of mercy might buy them a sliver of trust, or it might convince Korvek they were weak. But he had already judged that crossing the line into slaughter would erode something core to the harbor's identity. They had teeth, yes. They were not animals. Korvek's fists clenched. He imagined venting compartments, painting the corridors of this smug, pristine ship with human blood. He imagined dragging the captain to the front of every ward and forcing him to watch executions. But he also imagined his own clans reacting to the news that he had ordered the death of their wounded comrade after humans had saved him. Draav were ruthless, but they had their own codes. Throwing away a life so wastefully might cost him loyalty. He turned and drove his fist into a bulkhead instead. The metal dented under the blow. You think this wins you something, he snarled. It wins you nothing. I will take your ship, your crew, your machines. When I am finished, there will be no trace you were ever here. Rian met his eyes. You can take a hull, he said. You can't take what we've already become by being here. Korvek did not understand the words fully, stripped of translation nuance, but he understood defiance. He stepped close enough that Rian could feel his breath. You have until my man wakes up, Korvek said. Then I will show you what I take first. Outside, unseen by either of them, the Lumestral slipped closer through the rift, its shields crackling as ion streams clawed at them. Inside, Alessa Rin watched sensor ghosts of Draav ships shift around the chained icon of the harbor. Range? She asked. Dropping, her helm officer said, voice tight. We will be within extreme weapons distance in 20 minutes, but the interference is your job to manage, Alessa said. My job is to decide what to do when we get there. Her first officer stepped closer. We cannot match their numbers. Even if we surprise them, we'll be outgunned. We are not trying to win a fleet engagement, she replied. We are trying to keep a pirate commander from making an example of a hospital ship. That means taking away his confidence, not necessarily his hull. Her gaze moved to a subscreen showing Vareshi's last message. The Elder had described humans turning hospital fixtures into defensive tools. She would give them something they could use beyond their own steel and discipline. Prep boarding pods, she ordered. Minimal complement, cross-trained in close quarters and field medicine. They'll ride our gravity wake. We'll latch on while the Draav are still focused on looting. When the harbor moves, we move. And if the pirates detect us? Her first officer asked. Then we'll be very busy, Alessa said. On the harbor, hours became a fuse. Juno Cato, conscripted to assist in engineering under Draav oversight, slipped a loop of code into the environmental control subroutine. It would execute at 4 p.m. ship's time, triggering localized grav plate fluctuations in corridors where human veterans had positioned themselves, while rerouting stable gravity to areas designated as safe paths. She disguised the code as a calibration routine. Hugo prepared manual overrides along key junctions. Mirek organized able-bodied veterans into cells, each with its own micro-objective: disable a guard team here, capture a weapon cache there, block that stairwell. They communicated through apparently innocent conversations. "How's your rehab schedule?" someone would ask. "Twice a day," another would reply. "The morning one is rough." That might mean an operation at 8 a.m. or at 6 p.m. They had agreed on a simple cipher based on former patrol schedules, macabre humor wrapped around deadly intent. By late afternoon, the harbor felt hollow in places. Draav had stripped some corridors of equipment. Other sections were eerily quiet as they consolidated hostages. The ship's course had shifted again, now clearly away from any registered lane. In his commandeered command chair on the bridge, Korvek received a report from Rusk Tal. "The escort frigate has not attempted to re-engage," Rusk said. "We've monitored sporadic transmissions in the corridor, but no large forces are approaching. The Union is either slow or scared." "Good," Korvek said. "We'll strip this one clean and spike its hull on the edge of the rift as a trophy." Rusk hesitated. "We have more prisoners than we can transport comfortably. Keeping them all under control during a tow is risky." "Then we don't," Korvek replied, almost bored. "We take the ones worth something. The rest, we jettison. Blame the Sythari or one of the minor clans, or say the Union fired on their own ship to avoid the embarrassment. They lie as easily as they breathe. No one will question it." Rusk's jaw tightened. "Scattering corpses into the rift will bring attention." "Attention is the point," Korvek snapped. "Let them fear us. Nightingale paints targets on their own backs." Rusk left with a sour taste in his mouth. He had followed Korvek through many raids, cheered his daring, but this felt different. Plundering merchant ships was one thing. Turning a medical mission into an abattoir was another. Even Draav medical barges, crude as they were usually off limits. He thought, too, of the human surgeon who had saved their comrade, the way she had refused to sacrifice a patient even under threat. It gnawed at him. When the moment came, it did not arrive with fanfare, but with a flicker of lights. At precisely 5 p.m., grav plates along Corridor 3 Gamma hiccuped. For a second, weight vanished. Then it slammed back at partial strength. Draav guards cursed, staggering. Veterans who had been braced against rails eased into motion with practiced ease. Mirek led his group forward, exoskeleton whining softly. The ward doors had opened earlier under the pretense of moving marketable prisoners. Now they spilled into the corridor instead, apparently disoriented by the gravity glitch. One Draav raised his weapon. Pilar slammed her shoulder into his midsection, teeth bared in a grin that felt closer to a snarl. Behind her, Keiji moved with ghost-like efficiency, the stolen weapon he had concealed earlier, snapping up. The first shots were stun rounds. Juno had quietly switched the guards' ammo loads on a previous maintenance check, replacing lethal cartridges with their less deadly cousins. The Draav fired at shadows, hitting walls. HUDs displayed impacts. Lethal, non-lethal toggles blinked in confusion. In another corridor, a Draav squad found itself on a sudden slope as one side's grav plates fired stronger than the other. They slid, flailing, into a foam barrier that expanded from emergency nozzles. Veterans dropped from ceiling panels, having unscrewed covers under the guise of cleaning filters. They tossed med-foam canisters, added more cling. The Draav were swallowed in a sticky, immobilizing tide. Throughout the ship, similar micro-skirmishes erupted. None took more than 30 seconds. Each added a captured weapon here, a bound guard there. The veterans did not hold ground in the conventional sense. They moved, biting and retreating, leaving confusion in their wake. On the bridge, Korvek's chair jolted. "What was that?" he barked. "Gravity irregularities," a tech replied. "Some kind of malfunction in the human systems." Korvek's eyes narrowed. "They said they would not resist." "They are a hospital, not a warship," the tech said, too slowly. Korvek thought of the surgical deck, the bound guards, the preserved life. His envy of that discipline twisted into fury. "Seal off all access to the bridge," he roared. "Reroute power from non-critical decks to security systems. If a hatch doesn't recognize Draav codes, blow it." He He did not consider that in doing so, he might be handing more control to the people who knew which hatches were truly critical. Under his boots, unaware of his precise location, Rian Maddox advanced through a maintenance shaft with Mirek, Vareshi, and 2 other veterans. The shaft was narrow. Vareshi's robe snagged on protruding struts. He bore it silently. "Your people do this often?" he whispered, voice echoing faintly. "Boarding actions?" Mirek said under his breath. "Break into one pressurized tin can for any length of time. You learn how to get into others." Rian checked the readings on a small handheld panel. "We're right under the bridge. Access panel F7B. Hugo said the manual latches could be opened from this side if we'd persuaded engineering maintenance to misalign them during inspection, which he did." They reached a small, circular hatch overhead, disguised from above as part of a sealed conduit. Rian pressed his shoulder against it, feeling for vibrations. He heard the faint, regular thump of boots and the whir of consoles, the life of a commandeered bridge. "Ready the canister," he murmured. Vareshi handed him a heavy capsule about the size of a melon. Inside, a mixture of anesthetic gas and overpressure charge waited. It had been cobbled together in the last few hours from surgical supplies, fire suppression cartridges, and veteran ingenuity. "You are surprisingly adept at improvising weapons," Vareshi observed. "Surprise is the lever," Rian said softly. "If they expect us to be passive, being anything else is a force multiplier." He cracked the latches. The panel shifted a fraction, revealing a sliver of bridge overhead. He saw a Draav boot, a section of chair leg, the lower curve of a console. Enough. He wedged the canister into the gap and yanked the release. There was a muffled bang. Overpressure snapped up through the cracks, accompanied by a puff of gas. For a few seconds, air in the upper room became a hammer, smacking at drums and lungs. Draav roared in surprised pain. Consoles sparked. Then the overpressure dissipated, leaving behind a haze of fine mist that began to work on exposed membranes. On the bridge, Korvek staggered, clutching his head. A blood vessel in one ear ruptured, fluid trickling down the side of his neck. His vision blurred. The room's edges melted. He fumbled for his sidearm. "Breach!" someone shouted. Rian slammed the hatch up and out. It clanged against a console. He hauled himself through the opening, ignoring the shriek of his spine and the electric shock of pain down his leg. He emerged into chaos, Draav reeling, some on their knees, others trying to align weapons. He moved toward the nearest with a single-mindedness that came not from training manuals, but from the memory of burning hulls. His fist, still gripping the edge of the hatch frame, swung toward a helmet seam. He drove it in, felt the impact rattle through his bones. Mirek came out next, using the lip of the opening as leverage to propel himself into a tackle. His bad leg faltered mid-air. He adjusted, rotating, turning what could have been a fall into a roll that took 2 Draav off their feet. He hit the deck, breath whooshing out, but his hands found purchase on a weapon. Vareshi emerged with more care, his body not built for such explosive motion. He positioned himself by the open hatch, hands ready to pull others through or shove them back if necessary. Weapons fire crackled, console lights flickered. For a heartbeat, the bridge became a blur of limbs and muzzle flashes. Korvek lunged toward the main command console. Even half-stunned, he knew where the ship's most dangerous system sat. His thick fingers stabbed at a control pad. If he could trigger the self-destruct, even on a delayed timer, he would deny these upstart humans their victory. Juno's code, however, had rerouted critical authorizations. When his palm slapped the console, the system chirped an error, command codes invalid. In the milliseconds he spent registering that betrayal, Rian crossed the distance. They collided. Up close, Korvek was a mountain. He outweighed Rian by a factor of at least 2. His claws dug into the captain's uniform, tearing fabric. His breath stank of old meat. His headbutt rocked Rian's skull. Rian had never been the strongest man in any unit. He had learned other ways to win fights. He shifted his weight, letting Korvek's momentum roll him aside, hooking a leg behind the Draav's knee. His damaged vertebrae screamed as he twisted. Korvek stumbled. Mirek, seeing the opening, threw his exo-brace shoulder into the raider's flank. Servo's added force his muscles no longer had. The impact drove Korvek sideways into the console. Panels shattered, displays fissured. Korvek snarled and swung his arm in a brutal arc. His fist connected with Mirek's ribs. Bones cracked. Mirek's breath exploded out in a pained grunt. He tasted iron and felt something tear internally. He clung anyway. "You are weak," Korvek spat, trying to wrench free. "Old, broken." Mirek's lips twisted in a grin that was more baring of teeth than humor. "So are you," he rasped. "You just haven't noticed yet." He shifted his grip, dragging Korvek's arm across his own body, locking it. Basic martial technique, learned decades ago on a practice mat. Pain shot up his spine. He ignored it, anchoring the Draav leader for one crucial second. Rian used that second. He drove the heel of his hand up into the base of Korvek's crest, just below the studded ridge where bone met soft tissue. He had observed that spot during earlier confrontations, noted how Draav flinched when struck there. This time, he put all his weight, all his anger, into the blow. Korvek's legs buckled, his grasp on consciousness slipped. He collapsed onto one knee, then to his side, dragging Mirek down with him. Weapons around them stilled. Draav, disoriented and half-choked by gas, saw their leader fall. Some reached for triggers, others froze. Rian rolled, came up on one elbow, and pressed the muzzle of a captured sidearm to Korvek's throat. "No one fires," he said, voice low but carrying. "He dies. Your chain of command shatters. We all die together in a ball of plasma. Or you stand down and live to tell your clans what happened." His hand trembled, not from fear, but from pain and exertion. He could pull the trigger. He did not want to. Killing Korvek might simplify some things, but it would also remove their one piece of leverage over Draav, who still valued hierarchy. One of the bridge guards, eyes bloodshot, bared his teeth. "You will not leave this ship alive." "Maybe not," Rian said, "but my people will." "That's enough." Silence stretched, then a different voice cut through it. "Stand down," Rusktal said from the doorway. He had arrived with a small squad just in time to see Korvek fall. His own weapon hung at his side, barrel pointed at the deck. His gaze moved from the bound raiders on the floor to the human captain to the unconscious form of his leader. "Rusk, you traitor!" one Draav snarled, starting to raise his weapon. Rusk turned and backhanded him with a swipe that cracked a helmet visor. "I said stand down," he repeated. "We came for loot and leverage, not to die in a suffocating tin can because Korvek could not imagine defeat." His eyes returned to Rian. "You will not kill him." "Help me give him a reason to live then," Rian said. Before Rusk could reply, the entire ship shuddered. On external sensors, the Sythari cruiser Lumestral had finally made its move. It burst from behind an ion storm curtain, shields flaring blue-white as charged particles whipped at its hull. Its appearance shocked the Draav ships, who had been focusing their attention inward. Before they could reorient, the Lumestral flared its grav projectors. Instead of targeting the Draav, Alessa aimed at the Harbor of Ithaca. Tractor beams lanced out, intersecting with the ones already dragging the hospital ship. Gravitational tugs wrestled, vector sums shifting. For a few seconds, structural stress warnings lit both bridges. Then the balance tipped. The harbor's drift slowed, then reversed a fraction. From Draav perspectives, a larger predator had just sunk claws into their prize. On Draav ships' bridges, captains shouted conflicting orders. Some wanted to fire on the Sythari immediately. Others argued for cutting cables and running. The sudden ambiguity rippled through their fleet like a shockwave. On the harbor's bridge, lights flickered again. Rian found his awareness narrowing to a tunnel. Korvek's pulse thudded under his palm, slow but steady. Mirek lay on his back nearby, gasping, an arm wrapped over his bruised ribs. Rusktal lifted his hands, stepping fully into the room. "If you kill him," he said to Rian, "my warriors will fight to the last. Many of yours will die, perhaps all. He is a fool, but he is ours." "And if I don't?" Rian asked. "He'll gut us as soon as your people regain their footing." "You heard his plans. He wants an example." "I heard his plans," Rusk said. He looked down at Korvek, then at the humans again. "I also saw your doctor operating on our injured man while you attacked my guards. You had every opportunity to kill him on her table. You chose not to." "I'm a soldier," Rian said. "She's a doctor. We both have codes." "And what is your code here?" Rusk asked. "Kill or trade?" Rian thought not of codes but of faces in the wards. Civilians, burn victims, children who had been on Aristea visiting relatives now trapped on this ship. He thought of the veterans who had followed his unspoken signal, putting themselves back into harm's way when they could have turned inward and tended only their own wounds. "My code," he said slowly, is that if there is a path that ends with more people alive than dead, I take it, even if I have to trust someone I hate to walk it with me. Rusk studied him. Around them, Draav flexed fingers on weapons, waiting to see which way their lieutenant would jump. Finally, Rusk nodded once. Then here is the path. You keep him alive. He gestured at Korvek with a jerk of his chin. You keep our wounded alive. You keep my people who surrender alive. In return, we stand down and assist in restraining those who do not. We do not attempt to reclaim your bridge. When your friends out there, he tilted his head toward the unseen Sythari cruiser, come knocking, we tell them we are your prisoners. A Draav guard hissed. We are not. Rusk rounded on him. We are captured, he snapped. Our leader is down. Our flagship's bridge is in enemy hands. By Draav code, that makes us prisoners until a proper challenge can be issued later. You want to argue codes? Fine. We'll argue when we're not about to be atomized by a Sythari main gun because Korvek decided to posture in the rift. The argument hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then the guard dropped his gaze. Others followed. Rian lowered the weapon a fraction, though he did not holster it fully. You do this, he said, and I'll swear, on whatever you want, that my people will treat your injured the same as ours. You already did, Rusk said quietly. That's why I'm doing this. The harbor's internal battle tapered, then ebbed as news of the bridge's turnover and Rusk's stand-down order filtered through the Draav ranks. Some rebelled, tried to regroup, only to find themselves outmaneuvered by veterans who suddenly had Draav allies at their backs. A few died in pockets of stubborn resistance. Most chose the more rational path. As silence settled, the Lumestral sank its boarding pods like needles into the harbor's hull. Sythari Marines flowed aboard, elegant and lethal, weapons set to stun. They fanned out through corridors that still smelled of antiseptic and fear. They found, to their surprise, not a ship full of cowering victims, but a patchwork of wounded warriors, exhausted medics, and bound raiders. The humans greeted them not with cheers, but with expressions of bone-deep weariness and guarded relief. On the harbor's bridge, Alessa Rin stepped through the hatch, her robe singed at the edges from residual ion discharge. Her gaze locked onto Rian Maddox, still on his feet, still holding a weapon, flanked by Dr. Nazari, Mirek, and Vareshi. This is not what Project Nightingale briefed us on, she said dryly. No, Rian agreed. It isn't. Her eyes moved to Korvek, bound now with heavy restraints, a Sythari medic hovering nearby to ensure he did not slip into a coma. And this? This is a lesson in what happens when you assume people who hang up their rifles forget how to fight, Rian said. Vareshi stepped forward, inclining his head. Commander, I recommend that in my formal report to the elders, I describe this incident as an example of human complexity. They defended their vessel with ferocity, but they did not abandon their calling. They treated the enemy wounded. They refrained from annihilating their captors even when given the chance. Alessa considered them all, the human captain who had staged a mutiny under the flag of patience, the doctor who had cut an enemy open to save him, the battered veteran whose breath still hitched in shallow rasps, but whose eyes burned with stubborn light. Her own codes weighed in. Sythari doctrine valued restraint, but it also valued honoring courage where it appeared. Very well, she said. We will tow you out of the rift. Port Salukar awaits. I imagine many questions do too. Her lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. Be ready to explain how a hospital ship took on a raiding fleet and forced it to blink first without firing a single main gun. Rian let his arms slump, lowering the weapon fully now. His shoulders felt as if lead weights had been hung from them. His spine pulsed with exhausted fury. Around him, his bridge crew sagged. Explain it, he said. They'll never believe it. Oh, I think they will, Alessa said, glancing at Juno, who had been quietly recording segments of the mayhem. You forget how hungry your politicians are for narratives that make them feel brave again. Councillor Nabil Ono watched the first raw footage from Port Salukar's briefing room. The images shook slightly, captured by wounded crew and Sythari Marines, veterans in hospital gowns charging down corridors, nurses wielding fire extinguishers as blinding foam, Draav bound in med foam, cursing weakly, the Harbor of Ithaca's hull, charred in streaks, dragged by the Lumestral through the last ragged turbulence of the rift. He saw Captain Maddox on the bridge, face bruised, posture stiff, standing next to Rusk Tal as if they had planned this tableau together. He heard snippets of testimony, Dr. Nazari describing surgery under threat, Elder Vareshi speaking in measured tones about humans turning past trauma into present tools. Nabil's throat tightened. This was not the sanitized story he had wanted for Project Nightingale. It was messier, darker, and more compelling. His aides argued in the background. If this leaks, one said, the Combine will scream that Nightingale is a sham. They'll claim the Union hides soldiers on its hospital ships. Publics will cheer, another countered. They'll say we were not idiots to trust colored hull paint. We were cautious. We secretly planned for the worst. Secretly, the first repeated. That's the problem. Nabil silenced them with a raised hand. In his mind, he saw families watching this footage across the Union. Some would recoil from the violence. Others would see their own sons and daughters in those veterans' strained faces. He thought of the Sythari, too, and their careful, formal judgments. "We don't hide this," he said, surprising even himself. "Sir," one aide stammered. "We frame it," Nabil said. "We say, we tried to make a pure humanitarian corridor, but the universe is not pure, so we adapted. We did not build weapons into the hull. We invited those who had bled for us to stand between us and those who would prey on mercy. We gave them something worth guarding that wasn't a battlefield." His hand rested on the table, fingers splayed. "We call it the Veteran Guardian Corps, and we make sure everyone knows that if they board a white ship with blue sigils, they may find something much harder than they expected." His aides stared, then nodded, slowly. One was already drafting statements, phrases about resilience and responsibility and the price of peace. On Port Saluker's dock, the Harbor of Ithaca floated behind a transparent barrier. Her scars were visible even from the concourse. Welded patches, burned streaks, one corner of her hull where a Draav glyph had been painted and hastily scrubbed off. Inside, life resumed its work in warped patterns. Mirek Zorik lay in a bed with his ribs bound and a medline dripping analgesics into his vein. He disliked both conditions and made sure everyone knew it. Pilar sat on a stool beside him, rolling her eyes in mock exasperation as he complained. "You're supposed to rest," she said. "I'll rest when—" he started. "You're already horizontal," she pointed out. "That's at least half of it." He snorted, then winced. "Feels weird," he admitted more quietly. "What does?" she asked. "Being back in a bed because of a fight I wasn't ordered into," he said, "and knowing I'd do it again, thought I was done with that." "You're never done with being who you are," she said. "You just choose where to point it." Corpsman KG Tan appeared in the doorway, a datapad in hand. "Mirek," he said, "you've got visitors, 2 of them. Important looking." "In that case, pull the plug," Mirek muttered, but he pushed himself up, painkillers and stubbornness doing their duet. Rian Maddox entered, trailed by Councillor Nabil Ono. The politician's suit looked out of place among the utilitarian garments, but his expression had lost some of its practiced smoothness. He looked tired. His eyes, however, were sharp. "Mirek Zorik," Nabil said, "I've been told I should thank you for saving a ship I was responsible for sending unarmed into a war zone." Mirek raised an eyebrow. "We were armed," he said, "just not in ways you put on paper." "So I've learned," Nabil replied. There was no rebuke in his tone, only a strange blend of admiration and unease. "I came to ask a question. Several, actually, but one primary one first." Mirek glanced at Rian. The captain's face gave nothing away, but there was a faint softness at the corners of his mouth. "Go ahead," Mirek said. "If we formalize what you did here," Nabil said, "if we create a corps of veterans assigned to humanitarian missions, not as hidden assets but as declared guardians, will you help us shape it?" Mirek stared at him. Somewhere in his chest, a knot he had not noticed untied itself a fraction. "You're asking if I want to go back into harm's way officially," he said, "on a ship full of people who didn't sign up to fight." "I'm asking," Nabil replied, "if you believe those people are safer with you there or not, and if you want your experience to matter in ways that go beyond one lucky insurgency." Pilar watched Mirek's face as he wrestled with the question. She knew his history, knew how many times he had been told to retire, to stand down, to let the next generation take the hits. She also knew how restless he had been in rehab, how he paced when he thought no one was looking. "If you tell me this is a way to let old war dogs feel useful for a few more years before you shuffle us off ship," Mirek said slowly, "I'll throw this pillow at you, Councillor." Nabil held his gaze. "I won't insult you with soft words," he said. "This will be dangerous. It will be controversial. Some of our allies will hate it. Some of our enemies will learn to fear it. You may die on one of these missions." "Could have died already," Mirek replied. "That part doesn't change." "What does change," Nabil said, "is that you won't be pretending to be just a patient while you plan to save everyone. You'll be both, openly, and we'll back you, officially, when you do the impossible." Mirek laughed once, sharp. "You politicians and your addiction to the word impossible." He looked at Rian. "What do you think, Captain?" "I think," Rian said quietly, "that if they're going to paint targets on our ships, we'd better make sure there's something solid behind the paint." Mirek studied his own hands, calloused and scarred. He remembered the feel of the exoskeleton's servos whirring under stress, the weight of an alien weapon in his grip, the sight of a corridor full of patients watching him, their hope a palpable thing. "Fine," he said at last. "Sign me up. But we do it my way, our way. We don't turn hospital ships into camouflaged warships. We don't start fights. We end them as cleanly as we can. Non-combatants stay non-combatants. You try to twist it into something else, I walk. Understood?" Nabil nodded. "Understood." Pilar exhaled, half in relief, half in resignation. "Looks like I'll be filing for a position transfer," she said. "Someone has to make sure you take your meds between heroics." In another ward, Dr. Lala Nazari checked on a sedated Draav patient, the one she had operated on. His healing incision glowed faintly under a biolight scanner. His breathing was regular, his vitals stable. She felt a presence behind her and glanced back. Rusk Tal stood at the threshold, hands bound in front of him but unguarded. A human security officer lingered down the corridor, keeping a respectful distance. "You kept your word," Rusk said. "So did you," Lala replied. "Your people laid down their arms when it would have been easier to keep fighting and take everyone with you." Rusk looked at his comrade, then back at her. "We are taught that mercy is a weakness," he said. "But so is ignoring debt. My kind will take time to understand this. They will tell tales. Some will use them to scare their children. Others will listen," she said. He huffed. "We'll see." He did not apologize. She did not ask him to. Elder Vareshi sent his final report from the harbor before transferring back to the Lumestral. His words, when parsed by Sythari archivists weeks later, would ripple through their councils. He wrote of humans who volunteered for danger not because they loved violence, but because they refused to leave others undefended. He described how they took tools of healing and reconfigured them for defense, but never lost sight of their primary purpose. He noted that the same species that had filled so many war memorials also stocked their hospital ships with people who, when given the chance, would save an enemy's life, even as they planned to disarm him. He concluded that humanity's greatest danger lay not in their aggression, but in their refusal to accept any environment as fixed. They would reshape rules, corridors, treaties, even their own wounds to fit whatever they deemed necessary. At the end of his report, he added a recommendation that Sythari medical craft consider inviting a small number of human advisors aboard. Not to arm them, but to teach them how to think like people who expected the worst and still chose to bring the tools of healing. As the Harbor of Ithaca prepared to depart Port Salukar, her hull newly patched, a fresh emblem appeared near her bow. Beside the blue medical sigils, a smaller symbol had been added, a stylized shield encircling an outstretched hand. Veteran Guardian Corps, the new registries would say. Crew complement, doctors, nurses, engineers, civilians, and those who had already learned to walk through fire. From a secured viewport on a holding deck, Rusk Tal watched the ship's lights turn on, one by one. Beside him, a younger Draav shifted uneasily. "They're letting us live," the younger one said. "Why?" "Because they can," Rusk said. His gaze tracked the white vessel as it slid away from the station, flanked by the graceful curve of the Lumestral. "And because they want us to tell everyone we meet that the next time we see hull markings like that, we should remember this day." The younger Draav snorted. "That they are dangerous." "That they are dangerous," Rusk agreed. "And that sometimes those who are most dangerous are the ones who bandage you after they knock you down." The Harbor of Ithaca turned its nose once more toward the Brynthos Rift. Her engines flared, pushing her into a region that had tried to swallow her and failed. On her decks, veterans and medics prepared for the next quiet crisis, the next unheralded rescue. None of them knew when or if another raider would decide that a white hull looked like easy prey. But if that day came, the pirates would find more than scalpel blades and gauze waiting. They would find humans who had learned long ago that healing and fighting were not opposites, but twin acts of the same fierce protective will.